I'm going to let Rebecca Solnit open our service this morning. She said, revolution is as unpredictable as an earthquake and as beautiful as spring. Its coming is always a surprise, but its nature should not be. For times of radical and traumatic change, for grief and loss that close familiar doors and open others onto strange and rugged landscapes, for the awful darkness that might not precede a new dawn, we light this flame of faith in the impermanence of all things and kindle the passion that burns brightest in need.
This reading was written by Alondria Williams. If we believe in the promise of our faith, we must continue pushing forward, even if the reality makes us want to give up. There is no one-size-fits-all solution or model, but there are many paths forward based on context, relationships, and place. Ideology sparks movement, but relationships are what change organizations and sustain movements. It takes one relationship at a time. In the end, changes to the leadership of the institution happen because of relationships, people pushing. We must place value on the relationships and the need to not leave folks behind in our quest for transformation. I live in a small city, and living in that small city helps me understand what community means. Community doesn't only include the people who agree with you or those with whom you want to be friends. Our Unitarian Universalist faith is similar in the sense that we are a small religious or spiritual community of people who are not bound by creed, but instead are bound by principles, values, and a covenant with a need for intellectual rigor combined with spiritual depth and humanist love. Everything comes back to our congregations and covenanted communities. That is where the faith starts and ends. We must embody the changes we wish to see and not just say what we believe in the changes. We must actually live the changes with every fabric of our being. If we believe in the promise of our faith, we must continue pushing forward. And it seems to me that pushing forward and being transformational often results in earthquakes, which happens to be the topic that JD is going to talk about today. So JD, the podium is yours.
Somebody asked me before the service, what does Voyaya mean? And it means we are going, or we go. In 1989, my brother lived in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and two young daughters. And one evening, the whole family went to a park. And while they were there, the strangest thing happened. They heard this weird noise, and they turned to see a wave of grass rolling across the park. It looked just like a water wave on the ocean or on a lake, but it was composed entirely of dirt and grass. And behind it were even more of these odd waves. And before they knew it, it had passed underneath them, threw all four of them to the ground, where they rode out the remaining waves as they passed through, all of them laughing and kind of marveling at this funny, weird ride. and at how the nearby trees were waving like windshield wipers. And after about 10 seconds, it was over and the parkland returned to normal. So they dusted themselves off and they headed out of the park. But when they got to the street, they were greeted by total chaos, alarms and sirens, glass and rubble in the streets, buildings collapsed, people covered in blood, running and screaming through clouds of dust. It was the Loma Prieta earthquake. Anybody remember that? 67 people died and 3,700 were injured. It collapsed buildings and freeways, and you may remember it interrupted one of the World Series games that year. And I tell this story because I think it highlights how our worldview distorts our relationship with reality. Our worldview tells us that earthquakes are natural disasters that kill people. But earthquakes don't kill people. Plate glass buildings and concrete structures kill people in earthquakes, anyone in or near them, as those waves pass through. So our understanding of what causes earthquakes is actually relatively recent. It was actually submarine warfare during and after World War II that provided the conclusive evidence for plate tectonics. So we'd had this idea about continental drift for a while, but nobody took it seriously. But in an effort to find enemy subs that might be hiding silently on the bottom of the Atlantic, the US Navy mapped the magnetic signatures of all the rock layers of the entire Atlantic seafloor. And that map revealed that the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean has these perfectly symmetrical stripes of rock, with the youngest rocks in the middle where the undersea volcanoes are. Aha. And so what had been known as this kind of wacky idea of continental drift became known as plate tectonics, because now we know that the new rock layers appear at the center of the ocean and push the continents apart. But it took a while for people to catch on to this idea. Anne likes to tell about how when she was in middle school, she went to the library looking for books about continental drift, and she found them in the occult section, shelved with ESP and the Loch Ness Monster and stuff like that. And that was actually in the mid-70s, 30 years after geologists had this evidence about plate tectonics. Now, continents are heavy. They move really slowly, and they grind against adjacent crustal plates at the edges. But the edges aren't these smooth, well-oiled gliders, right? They're solid rock with bumpy places and mountains and stuff that is in the way. So if you put your fists together with your knuckles touching and try to move them in opposite directions, you'll find that they hold still briefly as pressure builds up, but then it releases in kind of a try this. I see you. Try this right now. Put your fists together, put some pressure on them, and then try to move one of them up and the other one down. And you'll see that pressure builds and then it lets go. When masses of rock do that, that's an earthquake, a sudden rupture that releases stress through movement. And where that movement occurs is called a fault line. So if the plate edges are shaped like your knuckles, the fault line would trace that kind of uneven boundary where the two sets of knuckles meet. With a really long fault line, like if 20 of us lined up facing each other with our knuckles pressed together and then tried to slide them in opposite directions, something interesting happens. The whole long fault doesn't necessarily slip at the same time. The fault ruptures in some areas while stress is still building up in other areas along the fault. So an earthquake that releases pent-up stress in one section of the fault just means that there's even more stress in adjacent sections. You follow me so far? And when those sections finally slip, the earthquake is even bigger from all that built-up stress. So lots of little earthquakes is safer, is better from a human standpoint than a few really big ones. But that's not a choice we get to make, right? Earthquakes are really difficult to predict. But the overall movement of the plates is fairly constant. And most plates move at about the speed of fingernails growing. So it's pretty slow from our point of view. At the risk of overstretching a metaphor, I think the American people have been collecting themselves into massive tectonic plates, with two main social and political groups moving kind of in opposite directions. And of course, there's a complex of smaller plates within and between the two big ones since maybe the 1980s, pretty similar to the tectonic plates on the surface of the Earth. And because we share a government and infrastructure and public spaces, we can't really help but grind up against each other at the edges, or at least we should have been grinding against each other. But the rise of social media bubbles has allowed us to skip all that uncomfortable friction and to just let the pressure build and build. And now American democracy is experiencing a major earthquake. Waves of disruption and fracturing might be little more than a fun ride in a humble, flexible local village based on mutuality and respect for the commons. But it may prove to be terribly destructive in the rigid, towering social and financial structures of a global empire. A few years ago, one of my mentors said to me, quote, "Never let a perfectly good crisis go to waste," end quote. And I was kind of floored. I was like, a perfectly good crisis? What's that supposed to mean? Well, you've probably heard that the Chinese word for crisis has two characters, one for danger and the other for opportunity. Well, it's not true. It's just not. Danger, yes, that first character stands for danger. But the second one has a bunch of meanings, none of which means opportunity when you translate it. The most common translation for that second half is inflection point or point of change. So a crisis brings danger and change, new directions. I think often by the time we recognize a state of crisis, it's usually too late to put things back the way they were. We are not going to make America great again, no matter whose definition of great we're using. Already, alliances are shifting. Fired workers are seeking new jobs. People are dying and migrating, and carbon is spewing. None of those is reversible. Earthquakes can't be undone. So lately, just the last few weeks, when people urge me to call my representatives at least once a day, I wonder if that's an attempt to put things back that can never be put back. I'm not sure about that, and I'm certainly not going to tell you not to make those calls. But it's not Congress that's broken. It's relationships. And relationships are always face-to-face, local, person to person. Our daughter was a chaplain at a New York City Veterans Hospital at the height of the pandemic, April to, well, actually longer than that, in 2020. So she watched dozens of her patients go into refrigerator trucks day after day after day. And someone heard this and asked her, "How do you stay positive?" She said, "I don't. I stay connected." That's been really meaningful for me. And talking about all of this with Anne over the last few days, she asked if I could recall any personal earthquakes in my life, times when relationship friction built up to the point of rupture. And we kind of laugh because this happens all the time in marriages, right? So in the interest of preserving my marriage, I'm going to use an example from something else. I once left a job I loved because of founder syndrome. Anyone familiar with that term? A few? It's very common in organizations, profit and nonprofit alike. So founders of successful endeavors generally have to devote every ounce of their lives to starting and maintaining the organization. It's their baby. It's precious. And along the way, they learn skills, they acquire skills that are essential to starting and growing an organization. And once the organization is successful and stable, at least a little bit stable, different skills are needed. But it's hard for founders to see that. So when it comes time for them to pass the torch to a next generation of organizational leaders, they often struggle to let go of the reins, holding on to the belief that only they know enough. They're the only ones or one that have the right skills to make a way forward for the organization. And they actually say things like, only I can save it. I'm the only one that has what it takes to continue making this a success. And so resentment and frustrations simmer in those second generation leaders who are ready to take the reins and move the organization forward. And those second generation leaders usually represent the exact same values as those expressed by the founders, but extended, applied in new ways to new arenas for the organization. But in founder syndrome, those second generation leaders are resisted, if not outright blocked, by the founders of the organization. And in my case, that frustration and resentment was kind of like the stress building up along a tectonic fault. Something had to give. And when it did, it ruptured kind of like an earthquake, and shock waves rippled through the whole organization. There is a well-deserved deference that is due to founders. They've earned it. And that means that it's rarely the founder who steps down in this kind of conflict. Instead, the tension builds until it becomes obvious to everyone in the organization that something has to give. And like with geological faults, when the rupture finally happens, anything rigid fractures like glass or shatters like concrete or vice versa. And things that had been hidden kind of underground in the organization get upthrust into the light. Some founders actually choose to blow up their organizations rather than watch them outgrow their own vision for them. The year I left, a majority of other employees also left, not because I did, but because some metaphorical sewer covers got blown sky high and some stinky underground dynamics became impossible to ignore. I think something similar is happening in our country now. One tectonic plate is occupied by originalists who insist that we interpret the Constitution, our sort of founding document of values, that we interpret that with the mindset of the slave-owning founders. And I think they are suffering from something akin to founder syndrome. They're conflating the skills and perspectives needed to start and grow a country with those needed to keep it relevant in a rapidly changing technological and egalitarian future. And that continental plate grinds up against one that's eager to move into a future that fulfills the highest values of the founders: liberty, equality, democracy, and to expand them in a vision that far exceeds the founders' vision, so far as to be unrecognizable and frightening to the originalists. Stress built along, if you'll stay with me in this not very good metaphor, stress built along America's fault line until it ruptured last November. And the earthquake waves are doing what earthquake waves always do when they encounter rigid structures. The waves themselves aren't really good or bad. They're just the natural outcome of stress being relieved in a sudden rupture. Unfortunately, lots of people live in and depend on those structures, and the glass is flying. So we're in a crisis. It's dangerous, and it's a point of inflection, a time of great change. You can't undo an earthquake. I know no analogy is perfect, and this one I don't think is even very good, but it has helped me to acknowledge and accept that the world is changing drastically and rapidly, and I can neither stop it nor reverse it. So my first task, as I see it, is to protect myself and others from the collapsing structures I once thought were permanent. And then instead of trying to prop them up with my bare hands, I want to step back a bit and think further ahead and ask myself what we might build out of the rubble. We can't even see the rubble yet, but at some point, we'll be living in it. And for me, building something new and better always begins with relationships. Flexible, resilient, local, face-to-face interactions with people I'm directly connected with. Do I know the people who grow my food? Do I know how to grow food? When's the last time I shared a meal with the neighbors that live closest to Ann and me? Do I know the name of anyone who works at my water treatment plant or the power company? When's the last time I spoke with my mayor or county commissioner? Where are the boundaries of my watershed, and who lives up and downstream from me? I don't have good answers to those, not satisfying ones for sure. And I suspect you don't either. I want to play a song for you, and I do so a little bit sheepishly because I play drums on this recording, but that's not why I'm sharing it. This is my friend Doug McWilliams, and it was recorded in 1988. And this song happens to be perfect for this week, this time, and my message this morning. So I just made this lyric video in the last few days. So pay attention to the lyrics. Go ahead and roll fault line. I'm going to get out of the way so you can see.
Sitting here in traffic on the LA freeway. Got a handful back and the signs is getting away. They locked up power shot tin cans on the line. Not a car door crack to give this boy a ride. Cars are steaming, the kids are fuming, and everybody's too afraid. The little decoration, we could make this a parade. I take time to read and counter to explore why you're afraid of a little interaction from a different source of action. Yes, it's time to get a reaction from this old tea. A little interaction, to start a new direction. A little social action's all I need. All we need. Cut up by a wide jag, all the mirrors pointing to town. Don't you think I'm sexy on a CD blaring it down? Top down sheets, grill cover cans in the blinds. Your blade says Freddy and your chrome shining in my eyes. I got my bumper stickers ready, gonna get your bumper ready. With your polish up so finally we'll be covered up with candy. Seeing them, simply the weather's been simply live. Living on a fault line. Now the shakedown's coming, better watch the signs on a fault line. They get me grow before we draw the line. Living on a fault line. It's the fault that shows the fault is mine. Living on a fault line. Living on a fault line. Living on a fault line. Living on a fault, living on a fault line. Living on a fault, living on a fault line. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Living on a fault, living on a fault line. We stumble into trouble and we find there are no sides. You caught me with my guard down and we're seeing eye to eye. I look in your mirror, there's a face that we hide behind. Living on a fault line. Shakedown's coming, better watch the signs on a fault line. They kept me growing before we draw the line. Living on a fault line. Here's the fault that shows the fault is right. Living on a fault line. Living on a fault line. The earth shaking, see the people moving all around you down, down to down. See the earth shaking, see the people moving all around you down. Don't you think it's time to move? 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 Living on a fault, living on a fault line. Living on a fault, living on a fault
I think our political and economic landscape has been dominated by fragile, overextended structures, hedge funds, industrialized agriculture, and a complex global economy where materials crisscross the oceans 5 or 6 times as they stagger from mine to landfill. Just last week, I learned that 2 million chickens were killed and incinerated at a massive egg farm just about 3 miles from our house in Harrisburg due to bird flu. I had no idea. We passed that farm all the time. I had no idea that there were 2 million chickens in those buildings by the side of the road. It doesn't take much of an earthquake to collapse such towering but fragile edifices. A resilient landscape, physical or metaphorical, is made of uncountable members, tiny grains of dirt and blades of grass, stones and trees and critters. So when earthquake waves pass through like waves on an ocean, all those little things, all those little people get jostled, maybe knocked on their butts, but mostly they enjoy the ride and then settle back down, flexible and resilient. Even tall trees waving like windshield wipers in a strong earthquake mostly return to normal afterwards. May we do likewise. A new normal. Know that my background is in science, and that's where I can speak most authoritatively. So I don't. Let me start with this. I'm not a biblical scholar, but I have read the Bible all the way through. And when I look at the way the prophet that you call Yeshua, when I look at the way he lived his life, there are a few patterns that stand out most strongly for me. Inclusion of people that society rejected, help and charity for everyone, especially the most vulnerable. He consistently challenged the political and financial interests of his day and championed the rights and the sacredness of those who are most vulnerable, the outcasts, the people who were considered dirty. And most often that meant poor people, sick people, foreigners. I know that there is human trafficking happening in our country. Personally, I think the best way to address that is a strong and robust law, adhering to the rule of law and encouraging and incentivizing average people to see it and recognize it and report it so it can be dealt with. I don't think it has anything to do with Satanism, personally. I think it has to do with people wanting to make money by enslaving other people. And I don't think defunding law enforcement and undermining the rule of law is a good way to address that. In fact, in the disruption that I see occurring now, it seems like there is more of an opening. Any kind of uncertainty or disruption makes human trafficking more likely to happen. Trying to stick with the spiritual rather than the political up here. But yeah, for me, a big part of the world I wish to live in can be taken straight out of the New Testament looking at the way Jeshua was in the world. I want to be like him. And many of the people, too many of the people who call themselves followers of Jesus are behaving in the exact opposite way from my perspective.
Well, that will have to be the last word in the service. It doesn't have to be the last word today. We'll have conversation afterwards. If you are a guest and willing to stay around, we have refreshments through the door to my left. We would love to hear your thoughts. JD would love to engage with you. Let us close with hymn in the Teal Manual 1021. Lean on me.